Hello, Miss Carla again. Nice to see you. We're going to continue reading Love, Sugar, Magic, A Dash of Trouble by Anna Mariano. I did my fingernails yesterday. Aren't they pretty? I don't think I've messed them up yet, except for I did get a scratch on my thumb because my cat scratched me. He didn't mean to. It was an accident, but I put Band-Aid on because I was bleeding a little bit. But otherwise, my fingernails look lovely. See, I'm like a fancy presenter person. And again, this is a nominee for grades 3 through 5 for the Rhode Island Latino Books Month Award for 2020. And today I did bring my little posters to show you. This is a list of all of the nominees for this year. And you can see they're organized by grades: kindergarten through 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. But again, you don't have to read in the grade you're in. You just can read in the grade you're comfortable in. So if you read a little bit ahead of your grade or below your grade, that's totally fine. Just read 3 books in that category, and you'll be able to vote on your favorite one before March or before the end of May. I also brought this, which is another little poster I made. And this shows just the books in the category we're reading in right now. So this is the one we're reading this week and last week. And then I also have this one, Sarai Saves the Music, and this one, Read-Aloud. So we might end up going to read those when we finish Love, Sugar, Magic. The other thing that's different today is I turned on the live chat and the comments, so you should be able to participate if you want to. If you have any questions or comments, you can type them in, and this is my first time trying to do it this way, so I will try to respond if you ask a question. Although I may not be able to interrupt the reading, we might have to do it at a pause in the reading. Today, we are on chapter 19, and it's called Spiderwebs. Leo felt relieved it was the weekend, because that meant no school, and no school meant no Brent. With her new spell in mind, Leo tagged along to the bakery with Isabel on Saturday morning, telling Mama that she wanted to start helping out more now that she had practiced some baking at home. Guilt from all her lies grew bigger and bigger, like rising dough in her stomach, but she didn't have a choice if she wanted to fix her mistake. Mama and Isabel served customers in the front, leaving Tia Paloma in the kitchen kneading sweetbread dough on the wooden countertop and muttering angrily to herself. Leo snuck behind her easily and made straight for the row of wooden cabinets. She needed a few special ingredients for her new spell, and she suspected that these cabinets were just the place to find them. And now we have the recipe for frasco de miel atrapacorazones, una trampa de amor. Ingredientes: 1 frasco de vidrio de cualquier tamaño, 1 vela para purificación, miel suficiente para llenar el frasco, 1 telaraña, 1 puñado de corazones de caramelo, unas hojas de lila. The heart snare honey jar recipe, used to attract and trap someone's mushy-gushy feelings, was simpler than the love bites. It didn't require any baking, or boiled sweatshirts, or eyelashes, or anything too hard to get from Brent. But it did need a single spider web and a box of Valentine's Day conversation hearts, which Leo didn't think they sold at the drugstore in November. Leo started by opening the first cabinet and quickly scanning the contents of its shelves. It was filled mostly with non-food things, bowls and spatulas and egg beaters and waxed paper. And on the top shelf, next to the few glass casserole dishes, Leo spotted the third thing she needed, a big glass jar with a metal lid, exactly the sort of jar that jelly or pickles might come in. Leo glanced over her shoulder, made sure that Tia Paloma was busy. Then she stood on her tiptoes and grabbed the glass jar, pulling it down and slipping it into her backpack as quickly as she could. She moved on to the second cabinet. The chalky conversation heart candy was easy to find, filling a big Ziploc bag next to a smaller bag of candy corn, another filled with red striped peppermints, and the plastic mesh sack of chocolate coins. Leo had no trouble sneaking a handful of hearts out of the bag and into her pocket. She didn't think a little bit of lint would bother the spell. So far, so good, Leo thought. The spider web turned out to be a little trickier. Leo scoured the corners of the bakery floor, but other than scattered specks of dust and flour, she didn't find anything. Mama would never let spiders live in the bakery, and she would never allow dusty cobwebs to collect anywhere near the food she served her customers. Leo thought hard. She couldn't imagine Mama putting spiderwebs from the floor into any recipe, no matter how magical. But if she didn't get her ingredients from the floor, then she must get them from somewhere. She turned back to the last cabinet, the one she hadn't looked through yet. At first glance, she only saw flour, sugar, and other large bags full of common ingredients. But the top shelf, up so high Leo could barely see it, held small boxes and tins that Leo couldn't name, ingredients that she had never seen used. A plastic bag sat on the top shelf, a gold twist tie around its neck, holding what looked like a stack of very fine lace doilies. It was next to a jar of blue-black feathers and a rolled-up paper bag labeled Extra Strength, along with some odd-looking dried plants and leaves that practically screamed, "Magic ingredients stored here!" Leo checked over her shoulder. She stood on her tiptoes to get a better view of the top shelf and almost clapped her hands when she saw the title Spiderwebs, written in Tia Paloma's scratchy handwriting across the front of the plastic bag. She reached up to snatch it, and, "Is that you, Leo?" Tia Paloma asked. "Do you happen to see where I put the bottle of vanilla extract?" Leo startled and drew her hand back, almost knocking over the jar of feathers and accidentally pushing several of the bags into each other. The bag with the spider webs flopped over backward, and Leo could no longer see where it was on the shelf. Tia Paloma bustled up behind Leo and pushed her aside to grasp a small glass vial from the middle shelf. "Morning." Leo turned so her aunt couldn't see the lump in her backpack. "What are you making?" Tia Paloma turned to look over her shoulder, stared into space, and didn't answer. "It's chaos around here," she said after a minute. "I would lose my head if it wasn't attached." Leo retreated through the swinging doors, her guilt burning holes in her cheeks and through her belly button, hoping the stolen jar didn't rattle too loudly in her backpack. In the front of the bakery, Mama set Leo to work packing bags with ginger snaps, just like Leo and Caroline had for Brent. Leo was glad the bakery would be selling them, because that meant if Brent ever tried to investigate his secret admirer, he would find out that anyone could have bought the cookies and left them in his locker. Not that Brent was in any condition to play detective. He was too busy composing love poems to the whole world. As Leo filled bags and twisted the golden wires tight around them, her mind went back to the top shelf of the third cabinet. She needed those spider webs to make the honey jar spell, and she needed the honey jar spell, the heart snare, to trap Brent's wild romantic feelings until they turned back to normal. When Leo first explained the plan, her idea to use another love spell to cover up the first, Caroline had been skeptical. "How do we know it won't make him worse? What if the spells don't cancel each other out?" Leo didn't have much of an answer to that. The best she could say was that the trapping part of the spell seemed right to her, It seemed like it would work for what they wanted it to do. And, she told Caroline again, Brent was already the victim of a bungled love spell. It couldn't get much worse. Leo watched from a corner behind the counter as a family with a tiny baby came into the bakery, smiling as they placed a birthday cake order. The silver bell on the door shook as they left. Next came a very old man who asked Isabel for his usual and was rewarded with a guava cono and a small paper cup of milk. People walked in hungry and excited, sniffing the air and greeting Mama and Isabel and Leo with friendly waves. They left with smiles on their faces and sweetness on their tongues. Leo wanted to relax into her work and the warm bakery air. She just needed to get the spider webs first. Leo shoved the rest of her twist ties into her pocket when no one was looking. Then she stood up, stretched, and walked through the swinging doors into the back of the bakery. Tia Paloma kneaded dough with her back to Leo, nodding occasionally. "It's thick enough," Tia Paloma whispered as Leo crept across the kitchen, "because I'm the one touching it, that's how." She sighed and then continued in an even quieter voice. "Don't you have other grandchildren to spy on?" Leo crept to the last cabinet, hoping the ghost Tia Paloma was speaking to wasn't a tattletale. She pulled the door open. She slowly unzipped her backpack, stood on her tiptoes, and reached for the top shelf, groping for the crinkly bag with the golden twist tie. Her hand passed over the paper bag, the jar of feathers, and a lump wrapped in silky cloth before finally touching the bag of spider webs. Behind her, something heavy clanged and clattered, and Tia Paloma yelped. In a flurry of panic, Leo swept everything off the shelf into her arm and shoved it into her backpack, slamming the cabinet door and turning around just in time to see Isabel run through the door and help Tia Paloma clean up the mess of the fallen tray. Tia Paloma laughed and apologized for her clumsiness. Leo helped pick up and throw away all the lumps of unbaked dough that were now stuck to the tile floor, and nobody asked what she was doing in the back of the bakery. Nobody mentioned that her backpack was only half-zipped and fuller than it had been that morning. And as she walked carefully back to the kitchen, nobody noticed the tiny clinking noise that came from 2 glass jars, one empty, one full of feathers, knocking together in Leo's backpack. The spell was officially ready to cast. Chapter 20 is called Honey Jar. On Monday morning, Leo got permission to go to Caroline's house after school. "Perfect," Mama said. "I have a special order to work on, and Daddy needs to take inventory, and we didn't want you to come home to an empty house. Have a good time, Hita, and we'll call when we're ready to pick you up." Brent spent the day in the same lovesick haze as before. If anything, the weekend seemed to have made him worse. He tried to serenade 3 different kids at lunch, but the entire 6th grade class was giving Brent the silent treatment. He earned a detention from Miss Wood after he proposed to Sarah Florence, one knee and all, in the middle of silent reading. "What is going on with you?" Miss Wood demanded. Leo slouched in her seat while her stomach twisted in knots. On the bus ride home, Brent had some trouble choosing a seat. He wanted to sit by everyone, and no one wanted to sit by him. But Mrs. Lillis glared until Brent settled next to a 3rd grade boy who scooted as far away as he could and stared out the window. The girls discovered Caroline's dad unpacking boxes in the kitchen when they arrived. "There she is!" He pulled his long legs out of the doorway and stood with only a little bit of groaning. "Leo, always nice to have you. You know, you've inspired me to make this place livable again." He gestured around the kitchen, which Leo was happy to see now included some dishes that weren't made of paper and even a small frying pan. No table yet, but it was a nice start. Unfortunately, it was also inconvenient. The plan had been to use the kitchen for spell work, but they could hardly concoct a cover-up love spell right in front of Caroline's dad. "Are you girls going to bake today?" Mr. Campbell asked. "I could help out if you need something stirred or measured. Anything more complicated than that, and I'll just have to watch and learn." Leo glanced at Caroline, who laughed nervously. No, Dad, we're just going to do some homework in my room. Although, Caroline looked at Leo for a moment, then looked back at the floor. I think we can maybe make some tea to help us concentrate. Do you like tea, Leo? We have honey. Leo worried that Caroline's eyebrows might crawl right off her face if she kept raising them like that. I'd love some tea. Once they were safely locked in Caroline's room, with rainbow-handled tea mugs and a bear-shaped bottle of honey, Leo unzipped her backpack to pull out the recipe book, the empty jar, the bag of spiderwebs, and the pocketful of candy hearts, and a tall white candle borrowed from the dining room drawer. The rest of the mysterious magical items she had accidentally stolen were safely stashed under her bed until she could sneak them back to the bakery. Caroline looked at the ingredients, especially the delicate spider webs, with awe and listened raptly while Leo told the story of how she had almost been caught stealing them. The girls checked the recipe one more time, nodded at each other, and began the spell. Leo started by blowing into the empty jar. She made Caroline blow into it too, since the recipe book said that all the spell workers should. Caroline argued that she was no spell worker, but Leo said that if she was going to be helping, then she counted. After they filled the jar with their breath, Leo propped the white candle up inside the jar and lit it with the matchbook Caroline had in her bedside table drawer in case of power outages. As soon as the candle was lit, the fan in the middle of Caroline's ceiling stopped spinning and the light shut off. Caroline gasped. Leo imagined that she could feel the electricity tingling out of the walls and into her fingers, but it might have just been the excitement of knowing that her magic really worked. The girls watched as the candle burned down, purifying the jar, the spell, and their own intentions, according to the recipe. Leo counted out 13 minutes on Caroline's purple cat-shaped alarm clock, and then she twisted the lid onto the jar and let the flames suffocate while she and Caroline whispered Brent's name 3 times. Then Leo opened the jar back up, put the candle aside, and peeled away one single spider web to lay at the bottom of the jar. It looks thin. Are you sure it's strong enough to trap all of it? Leo looked at the jar. She had a lot more spiderwebs she could add, but she was going to do this spell just exactly right, according to the recipe, without even the tiniest change. It's fine, she said firmly. What's next? Next was the honey bottle, which Leo emptied into the jar while concentrating on her memories of Brent's sappy notes, his cafeteria fight with Emily, and his silly serenades. These were the emotions they wanted to trap, and Leo reeled in all the sourness they had brought and replaced it with the sweetness of the honey and the candy hearts she dropped into the jar. It was complicated, trying to think and feel and concentrate on so many things at once, but the complications made her feel strong. She could smell the magic dripping and oozing into the jar along with the honey. When the jar was half full and the bottle almost empty, Leo stopped. She put the bottle down, licked the sticky smudges off her fingers, and brushed loose pieces of her hair off her forehead. Next is the lilac leaves? She looked at Caroline sitting cross-legged on the bed and watching with wide eyes as Leo worked her magic. You said you could get that, right? Got it. Caroline reached to grab something off her bedside table. My dad got a new bonsai collection, and one of them is a miniature lilac tree. She opened her hand, and Leo smiled at the pile of little green leaves her friend held out. They really look like hearts, tiny ones. She picked up one of the leaves and dropped it into the honey. So cute! Trap Brent, Leo thought as she let more leaves fall one by one into the jar. Don't let him act enchanted any more. Snare his feelings. She hoped the spell was going to work because she had no idea what she would do if it didn't. She had followed the recipe exactly this time, from the spiderweb to the heart candies to the leaves that, while small, were still lilac. The spell had to work. When the honey jar trap was set, Leo screwed the lid on tight. The lights flickered back on, and the fan resumed its buzzing hum. Caroline helped Leo pack the full jar into her backpack, along with the recipe book, jumping up and down as she did so. Now we have to bury it. Leo pulled the heavy backpack over her shoulder and tapped her fingers against the straps. Do you think your dad would be suspicious if we did it behind your house? Not at all. Let's go. Caroline's backyard had grown wild since the move to Houston, a sea of tall, spiky grass interrupted by the tree in the back corner and the round island of the trampoline that Leo was immediately tempted to visit. Mama hated trampolines. Unsafe. But Leo loved them. They jumped for hours when Caroline first got it. Beyond the trampoline, under the shade of the yard's one tree, there was a long wooden table covered with potted plants and gardening tools. Leo smiled and made her way to see Mr. Campbell's bonsai. The miniature plants were impressive, a line of 3 beautifully shaped trees in shallow black pots, and 4 or 5 more wobbly-looking plants that seemed bare and incomplete, some with sections of leaves turning brown or yellow. Oliver, come here. It's okay. The nice ones he got from a nursery. He keeps trying to make his own, but they always die. Leo nodded. Like my dad trying to make avocado seeds sprout. My mom always made fun, but she loved them too. She would read outside while my dad worked on pruning new trees. Leo traced the trunk of a bonsai that curved in a spiral. She thought of Mama and Daddy sitting side by side in the living room, working through a pile of papers. One of them without the other would be unbalanced, off kilter. Leo pressed her lips together and curled one hand around her stomach. Sorry, Caroline said. It's weird if I talk about my mom, right? Of course not. I don't know. I probably don't say the right thing, but you shouldn't stop talking unless you don't want to talk. Sometimes I don't. Caroline stared at the cloudy gray sky. Sometimes I want to pretend like everything's normal and she's still alive and inside the house. And sometimes I get tired of pretending. It feels good to remember, like at the Day of the Dead festival. Leo nodded, wishing she shared Isabel's ability to comfort by magic, or at least Mama's non-magical talent for listening. The bonsai make me think of her. There's something special about them, isn't there? Caroline asked. Leo grazed her fingers over the light purple blossoms of the lilac bonsai, noticing a few bare spots in the tree's heart-shaped leaf canopy. There was something special about the tiny trees. She could imagine fairies living under the branches. Let's dig here. They had planned to bury the jar on the west side of the yard, as close as they could get to Brent's house. But looking at the bonsai trees, Leo felt certain that the plants carried their own kind of magic, and she wanted to tap into that magic. What better place to hide a spell than in a fairy garden? Okay, Caroline glanced at the living room window and then positioned herself so that any of Leo's movements would be blocked from sight. There's a little shovel behind that pot. Tell me if you need help or want to switch places. The shade of the table discouraged the grass, making Leo's digging easier. A few scoops down, the dirt was soft and damp and dark. In almost no time at all, her nails were black-rimmed, and the jar fit into the hole with only a little bit of pushing and wiggling around the sides. Leo patted the dirt down around the jar, said a quick prayer, hoping for this to actually work, and then stood up and smiled at Caroline, trying to look less nervous than she felt. The recipe said it needs to stay overnight. Caroline glanced towards Brent's yard, then at her living room window, then at the still slightly noticeable bulge of dug-up and replaced dirt under their feet. So we definitely won't see results until tomorrow. Right, so we definitely don't need to worry about it until morning. Right, no worries, Caroline said. The two girls stared at each other and worried. I guess we could go lie on the trampoline if you want. Yeah, but Leo didn't move, and neither did Caroline, and they both stood in front of the table worrying until Caroline's dad came outside to ask if they wanted to order pizza for dinner. Mama couldn't understand Leo's hurry to scarf down her scrambled eggs the next morning. Isabel and Marisol couldn't understand why she craned her neck to try to spot the school bus from blocks away, and Mrs. Lillis couldn't understand why Leo nearly sprinted up the bus steps and down the aisle slamming into her seat. Leo kept tapping her toes and drumming her fingers until the bus pulled up to Brent and Caroline's stop, and then she leaned forward in her seat and watched as a third grader walked onto the bus, followed by Caroline, alone, chewing on her pinky fingernail and tugging her ponytail. And then the doors closed. "I don't know," Caroline whispered before Leo could even ask anything. "I don't know if it worked. I don't know what happened. I don't know where he is." Her voice squeaked on the last sentence, and the fifth graders in the seat in front of her turned around to giggle. "It's okay." Leo tapped her feet faster than ever. "Maybe he just got sick again. Maybe he's cutting class. Maybe his mom is taking him to the psychiatrist to figure out what happened to his brain." Caroline's face went white. "You don't think she really would, do you?" No, probably not." Leo didn't want to make Caroline worry anymore. "I'm sure everything's fine." And then, because she had made up her mind to try not to lie to Caroline any more, "I hope." Despite that hope, Leo got more and more worried as the day went on. Volunteering to bring the attendance sheet to the office, Leo saw that Miss Wood had marked Brent's absence unexcused, which meant that his mom hadn't called. During the daily math warm-up, Leo overheard Josh and Randall talking about how mad Coach Q was going to be at Brent for missing another soccer practice without giving any notice. Then, after lunch, Miss Wood had red eyes and a worried expression and didn't act at all surprised when Josh, Randall, and Emily Eccles were all called to Principal Jefferson's office right in the middle of silent reading. Caroline turned around in her desk. Her eyes were wide and full of panic. Leo scribbled a note on a scrap of paper ripped from her notebook, dropped it on Caroline's desk on her way to pick a new book from the classroom library, and when she guessed Caroline had taken enough time to read the plan, took a deep breath and started to cough as loudly and violently as she could. "Goodness, Leo, are you all right?" Miss Wood pressed her bright red nails to her mouth, looking more upset than a simple coughing fit deserved. "Why don't you go get some water?" Just a few minutes later, Caroline joined Leo in the girls' bathroom, pulling her cell phone out of the pocket of her jeans. "I don't know the number, but my dad taught me how to use 411. She dialed the number and held her phone to her ear. "Hello? Rose Hill, Texas? Can you give me the number for Mrs. Margaret Bayman?" Leo raised her eyebrows, impressed. She didn't know how to look up phone numbers without the internet. "Yes, thank you." Caroline pulled the phone away from her mouth. "She's connecting me," she whispered. "It's ringing. Oh, Leo, you do it." And she pushed the phone up to Leo's ear just in time for a shaky voice to say, "Hello? Hello, Mrs. Bayman? May I please speak to, Brent, your son?" Caroline had her head pressed close to Leo's, so they both jumped when a horrible, strangled wailing sound came out of the phone. "Who is this?" Mrs. Bayman's voice was frantic. "What do you want? Who are you? Do you know something about my Brent?" Leo snatched the phone out of Caroline's hand and hung up, her heart pounding, cold panic tingling down her arms. Something was wrong. Beyond wrong. Something was terrible. "We have to go over," she told Caroline, "right after school." Caroline nodded mutely, her face pale and her thumbnail stubbed and bleeding. Leo used Caroline's cell phone to call Mama the second school let out. "I'm sorry," she said, not even caring if Mama heard how upset she was. "I know I'm supposed to ask beforehand, but I needed to go to Caroline's house today. It might be an emergency." "Oh, Hita," Mama sighed. "I do wish you could have eased me into this whole growing up thing a little slower. I'm glad you and Caroline are falling into your old routine, but I don't want you to completely disappear on us." "Mama," "But I remember what middle school is like. Go, take care of your emergency. Just promise me you two will take care of some emergencies over here sometimes." "Okay, Mama." Leo hung up the phone, feeling queasy and jittery like she had just eaten a whole gallon of coffee ice cream. Mama thought that her emergency was a middle school thing, a growing up thing like makeup or Mean Girl drama. What would she do if she suspected the truth? "He's okay, right?" Caroline fidgeted with her shirt. They waited anxiously for the bus to pull up in front of the school. He has to be okay. It was just a love spell, Leo whispered as they climbed into their seats. Brent's mom overreacts, Caroline repeated to herself over and over during the short bus ride. They fell silent when the bus pulled up to Caroline's street and they saw the flashing blue and red lights of the police cars encircling Brent's house. The next chapter is chapter 21. Gone. Dad? Caroline called as soon as she opened the back door. Caroline! Mr. Campbell ran into the kitchen, his pale face matching his daughter's perfectly. Oh, and Leo, always good to have you, but do your parents know you're over? They might want you home today. Leo couldn't answer him. Her mouth was too full of bad, guilty feelings. Dad, what's going on? Caroline said. I don't want you girls to worry. Caroline's dad kept glancing toward the window where the flashing lights glinted. But if you know anything about... If either of you talked to Brent Bayman recently, he's missing. Missing? The words left Leo's mouth before she decided to say them. What do you mean missing? How can he be missing? Gone from his bed this morning. No sign of a break-in, so he must have left on his own. So if you know anything, it's very important that you tell the police, Mr. Campbell explained, his face grim. Caroline reached for her dad's hand, then for Leo's. Leo gripped Caroline's soft fingers while her mind ran in pointless circles and collapsed on the dizzying realization. Brent was gone. Leo's legs shook and she clung tighter to Caroline's arm to stay upright. Brent was gone and it must be her fault. But how? Maybe he had run away from home after all. Maybe the confusion of so many love spells had made him chase after a passing car. That had to be it. He was lost. But the police would find him. But even when Brent came home, there was no way Leo could hide her spellcasting from her family now. She was going to be in so much trouble. Leo wished she was a regular witch, the kind from movies and TV shows who could snap a finger and make herself disappear. The kind who used her magic to fix messes, not to make them. She hoped Brent was safe, wherever he was. She hoped he was somewhere. If only she had never tried that horrible honey jar. The honey jar. Caroline, Leo tugged her friend's hand. Caroline, can we go outside for a minute? I want to... She didn't know how to finish, but luckily no one expected her to. Caroline nodded, and Mr. Campbell kissed the top of his daughter's head. If you don't mind, Leo, I'll drive you home in a little while. Caroline, you come too, okay? I'd rather not be worrying about you. Okay, Caroline said. Just give us a few minutes. Mr. Campbell nodded. Leo and Caroline headed for the backyard as quickly as they could. It was truly cold now, enough that Leo shivered under her sweater. The bonsai still stood on the wooden table, and the ground under the table still bulged slightly from yesterday's digging. We have to dig it up and destroy it. Will that help? Leo didn't bother to lie. I don't know. The two girls paid no attention to secrecy this time. They clawed up chunks of loose dirt desperately, revealing the shiny golden lid of the jar in just a few seconds. It took longer to dig around the jar to create enough space to lift it out of the ground. It was heavy, Leo thought as she pulled it into her lap and brushed caked dirt off the sides. She didn't remember it being so... Caroline squeaked. Inside the jar was a person. A tiny person, no more than 5 inches tall, but a person unmistakably. The person was curled up and suspended in the honey, eyes closed and hands folded as if he were enjoying a nice nap. The person even wore Spider-Man pajamas. The person, unless Leo's eyes were playing tricks on her, was Brent Bayman. Leo. Girls, Mr. Campbell called from inside. I'll call you tonight, Leo said, shoving the jar into her backpack, dirt and all. I'll find a way to fix it. She gulped, struggling to zip her backpack with a shaking hand. I'll get help. I'll figure it out. I promise. That is the end of the chapter. So I think it's a good place to stop, even though, what are we going to do about Tiny Brent? Chapter 22 will be on Monday, and it is called Out of the Jar. Have a wonderful weekend.